Welcome to the Explainer. So, have you ever had an astrological reading that felt, broadly right, but somehow totally missed the exact crucial specifics of your life? Like they were reading a blurry version of your biography? Well, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're unpacking the methods of Shivanshu Pandey. He's a classical Vedic astrologer, formerly trained in the BPHS and Bhrigu Sutram. And what's really cool is he refuses to use AI tools in his readings. None. Instead, he uses his own self-made, copyrighted software, built strictly with his own logic and a bit of Claude code, to provide deep, handwritten readings complete with a 45-minute audio or Google Meet consultation. His work reveals exactly why these misreads happen, and it all comes down to a critical difference between two main charts, the Rashi chart and the Bhava chart.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the core astrological mistake. Then, signs versus houses. Third, the mechanics of the Lagna. Fourth, the Parasara principle. Fifth, we'll look at a proof using Saturn and Scorpio. And finally, how to integrate both charts.
All right, part 1. The core astrological mistake, which is relying only on the D1 chart.
Pandey points out this massive, gaping blind spot. Most clients show up with just their Rashi chart, that's the D1, and they're expecting this flawless, incredibly detailed reading. And unfortunately, most astrologers just use default commercial software and try to oblige. This is exactly why Pandey insists on rigorous, traditional methods and his custom software instead of taking quick shortcuts. Because confusing these two charts, it literally ruins the accuracy of the reading right out of the gate.
Okay, moving on to part 2, signs versus houses and drawing the line between them.
We really need to internalize a foundational rule here. The Rashi chart tells you where planets sit in specific signs. Aries, Taurus, Gemini. Think of this as the general neighborhood, or your zip code. The Bhava chart, on the other hand, tells you where planets sit in houses. First house, second house, third house, and so on. That is your actual street address. So the absolute golden rule to remember, Rashi equals signs, and Bhava equals houses. They are absolutely not interchangeable at all. Which brings us to part 3, the mechanics of Lagna, and what happens when houses overlap signs. All right, this is where the mathematical magic really happens. Imagine your Lagna, or ascendant degree, is sitting right at 22 degrees of Aries. Now, your first house doesn't just magically snap to the very beginning of the Aries sign. It doesn't work like that. Instead, it spans from 22 degrees of Aries all the way into the next sign, ending at 22 degrees of Taurus. Because of that overlap, if you have a planet sitting at, let's say, 5 degrees of Taurus, it actually falls into your first Bhava, your first house, not your second. And you can see how this creates a dramatic shift that can completely upend a reading. A simple, off-the-shelf commercial software program is going to place that Taurus planet neatly in the second Rashi sign box. But mathematically, in reality, it shifts into the first house in the Bhava chart. If you miss that shift, your entire interpretation of how that planet impacts a person's real life will be completely upside down.
Let's dive into part 4, the Parasara principle, our classical authority on energy.
Pandey's approach is deeply grounded in classical texts, specifically the BPHS. That's exactly why he uses his own custom code to actually honor this ancient mathematics rather than relying on modern approximations. And the sage Parasara is super clear on this concept called Bhava Madhya, the exact midpoint of a house. Parasara says this midpoint is where planetary energy is the absolute most concentrated and potent. So if a planet is sitting near a house cusp, it's actually in transition. Its energetic influence is literally split between two different houses, which drastically alters its effect.
So why on earth do most commercial astrologers just ignore this? Well, frankly, because the Rashi chart is visually cleaner and way simpler to compute. Modern software defaults to it, and clients understand that neat little visual layout much faster. But as we know, simplicity and accuracy are definitely not the same thing. Relying purely on the D1 chart means you're sacrificing the actual truth of the horoscope just for an easy-to-read screen.
Let's look at a real-world example in part 5, the Saturn and Scorpio proof. Let's set up the exact data points for a test to really prove the math here. Imagine a chart where the Scorpio ascendant is sitting at exactly 10 degrees, okay? Now imagine the planet Saturn is also positioned in Scorpio, but it's way at the end of the sign, at 28 degrees. Keep those two numbers locked in your head for a second. Ascendant at 10, Saturn at 28.
Here is the massive aha moment. In the Rashi chart, Saturn sits right alongside the ascendant sign in the first position. It looks incredibly simple, right? But wait, because the ascendant is at 10 degrees, the first house essentially ends near 10 degrees. So in the Bhava chart, that Saturn at 28 degrees is functionally entirely in the second house. Reading Saturn as being in the first house misidentifies its influence completely.
Finally, Part 6, integrating both charts to find synthesis for accuracy.
Now, the solution here isn't to just take the Rashi chart and throw it in the trash. No, it's to synthesize them together, which is exactly what the classical text intended. You absolutely must look at both charts together as an overlay. So you use the Rashi chart to determine the sign-based dignity of the planet, its sheer strength and elemental nature. But you strictly use the Bhava chart to see which actual area of life that planet is pouring its energy into.
To sum up this foundational rule, these are two totally distinct lenses. A planet might be incredibly strong based on its Rashi placement, sure, but if the Bhava chart drops it into a very weak house position, the real-world results you actually experience are going to be vastly different. Dignity and placement interact. They absolutely do not replace one another.
And this brings us right back to your own experiences. If you've been getting these automated readings that describe your life in broad strokes, but completely miss the highly specific events, well, this chart distinction is exactly why. You've essentially been getting half the picture. This is why Shivanshu Pandey advocates so strongly for deep dive, handwritten readings, and proper 45-minute consultation calls over those quick automated reports. The nuance we're talking about. It requires human attention and precise math.
So the question is, are you ready to look past the visual simplicity of your standard D1 chart to find the true, nuanced accuracy in your horoscope? Understanding this mathematical dance between the Bhava and Rashi charts is really the first key to unlocking classical Vedic astrology. And once you master this overlay, there are even deeper layers waiting for us, like the Navamsa chart, which we'll definitely have to cover in a future explainer. Until then, keep looking deeper and keep questioning those simple answers.